call of the moon, the dimly lit office of Spectral Seekers Paranormal Investigations buzzed with a low hum of anticipation. A flickering neon sign in the window cast a pale blue glow over the mismatched furniture, and the walls, lined with framed photos of ghostly apparitions and unexplained phenomena. In the center of the room, a round table was covered in an assortment of documents, digital devices, and cups of cold coffee. The team sat around the table, their expressions ranging from excitement to skepticism. At the head of the table, Alex Mercer, the team's leader, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, studying the faces around him. Alex was known for his logical mind and his relentless determination to uncover the truth, no matter how bizarre or outlandish the claim. He ran a hand through his short, dark hair, glancing at the laptop screen in front of him, which displayed a grainy, paused video. "All right, everyone, let's get down to business," Alex said, his voice carrying the weight of authority and skepticism that made him both respected and frustrating to work with. "We've all heard the rumors about Wolfsbane Woods. Ghosts, monsters, people vanishing without a trace. This place has been the talk of urban legends for decades, but now we have something a bit more concrete." He pressed play on the laptop, and the room went silent. The screen flickered to life, showing shaky footage from a handheld camera. The video, taken by a group of campers, was dark, lit only by the faint glow of their flashlight beams. The trees loomed like skeletal fingers in the night. In the background, the sound of heavy breathing and nervous laughter could be heard. Suddenly, the camera jerked, and a blurry figure darted between the trees, accompanied by a low, guttural growl. The image was indistinct, more like a smear of shadow than anything tangible, but there was an undeniable shape, something hunched, something that seemed more beast than man. "Did you see that?" came a panicked voice from the video, followed by a quick, frightened exclamation. The camera swung wildly, capturing only darkness, before the footage abruptly ended in a hiss of static. Alex paused the video and looked around at his team. "That's the best look we've got at whatever's out there," he said, his tone a mix of disbelief and intrigue. "Some say it's just a bear. Others think it's a hoax, but whatever it is, it's gotten people talking. And more importantly, it's stirred up some fear." Nina, the team's tech expert, with her sharp eyes and ever-present notebook, leaned forward, pushing her glasses up her nose. "I did a bit of digging," she said, flipping through her notes. "This isn't the first time Wolfsbane Woods has had strange sightings. There are reports going back centuries, 1600s to be exact. People claimed to see a beast with burning eyes stalking the woods. Others reported hearing howls that sent chills through their bones, even in the middle of summer. And then there are the disappearances. People who went in and were never seen again." Nina slid a yellowed newspaper clipping across the table. The headline read, "Local hunter vanishes in Wolfsbane Woods. Only his boots found near an ancient stone circle." Next to it, she placed a faded photograph of a misty, moonlit forest with a blurred, indistinct shape in the background. "That's the stone circle," she continued. "Locals say it's cursed. Supposedly, it's some kind of burial site or ritual ground, but no one really knows for sure." Daniel, the team's historian and folklore enthusiast, nodded in agreement. "I've been going through the testimonials," he said, tapping a thick stack of papers. "People have been seeing weird things in those woods for years. Strange lights, ghostly figures, even hearing voices that aren't there. And then there's the creature sightings. Some say it's a werewolf. Others think it's a skinwalker. The stories are all over the place. But they all agree on one thing. Something is out there, and it's not friendly." Mia, the team's newest member and a former journalist with a nose for mystery, glanced at the video again. "So, what's our plan?" she asked, her voice steady, but her eyes showing a hint of nervousness. "We're not just going in there to debunk some blurry footage, are we?" Alex smiled faintly, appreciating her directness. "No, Mia, we're not. We're going in with everything we've got. Full equipment, thermal cameras, EVP recorders, motion sensors, the works. If there's something in those woods, we'll find it. And if it's just a bunch of kids playing a prank, well, we'll expose that too." He turned to the large map pinned on the wall behind him, marked with red circles and notes. "We'll head out at dusk tomorrow," he continued. "We'll set up camp near the stone circle, where most of the sightings have been reported. We need to cover as much ground as possible and stay alert. If the woods are really as twisted as they say, we're going to have to be careful not to get separated. We stick together, follow the plan, and see what we find." The team nodded in agreement, a mix of excitement and anxiety in their eyes. They had faced haunted houses, abandoned hospitals, and forgotten cemeteries before. But this felt different. There was something about Wolfsbane Woods that seemed to pulse with a life of its own, something that felt old and angry. Nina packed up her equipment, checking each device meticulously. Daniel gathered his research, stuffing the papers into his worn leather satchel. Mia readied her camera and voice recorder, and Alex went over the plan once more, his mind racing with possibilities. As they prepared to leave the office, the air was thick with a sense of foreboding. None of them could shake the feeling that this investigation might be their most dangerous yet. Alex paused at the door, looking back at his team. "Remember," he said quietly, "whatever happens out there, keep your wits about you. We don't know what we're dealing with, but we're not going in blind." With that, they stepped out into the night, the shadows of the city swallowing them up as they headed toward the unknown depths of Wolfsbane Woods, toward whatever waited in the darkness, where the ancient stones lay, buried beneath centuries of fallen leaves and secrets whispered on the wind. And somewhere in those woods, something stirred, as if sensing their approach, something hungry. The night was thick and moonless, a black shroud hanging over Wolfsbane Woods. The towering trees loomed like silent sentinels, their skeletal branches intertwining to blot out the sky. A cold wind whispered through the underbrush, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and rotting leaves. In the darkness, the ancient stone circle sat half buried, its weathered stones jutting from the ground like jagged teeth. Not far from the circle, a small tent stood among the trees. Its fabric rippled in the breeze, a lone splash of colour in the sea of shadows. Inside, Ben and Rachel huddled together on their sleeping bags, the dim glow of a battery-powered lantern casting flickering shadows on the tent walls. They had come to Wolfsbane Woods, seeking solitude, a weekend escape from the noise and chaos of their everyday lives. But now, as the night grew colder and the forest grew darker, a strange unease settled over them. "Did you hear that?" Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible over the rustling leaves outside. She sat up, her eyes wide and alert, listening intently. For a moment, there was only silence, the deep, oppressive silence of a forest that seemed to hold its breath. Ben shook his head, trying to sound dismissive, though his own heart was pounding. "It's just the wind," he muttered, adjusting his sleeping bag. "These old woods make a lot of noise. Nothing to worry about." But Rachel wasn't convinced. She stared at the tent flap, her fingers clutching the fabric tightly. Then, from somewhere beyond the thin walls of their shelter, there came a low, guttural growl. The sound was faint at first, almost like a distant animal's call, but it grew louder, more menacing, resonating with an unnatural vibration that made her skin crawl. That doesn't sound like the wind," Rachel said, her voice trembling now. Ben froze, his breath catching in his throat. He sat up, his eyes darting around the tent. The growl seemed to echo all around them, a deep, throaty rumble that sent a chill down his spine. Maybe it's, a bear? Ben suggested, though even he didn't believe it. The growl wasn't like any animal he'd ever heard. It was too low, too resonant, as if the very earth itself were growling. Then came the footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching on the leaves outside. Heavy and uneven, they moved around the tent, circling, getting closer. Ben and Rachel held their breath, their eyes locked on the tent walls, as if expecting something to tear through at any moment. Rachel grabbed Ben's arm, her grip tight enough to hurt. "Do you see that?" she whispered, pointing to a shadow moving across the tent wall. A tall, distorted shape, impossibly large, loomed outside, casting a dark silhouette against the dim light of the lantern. Its outline was twisted and hunched, with what seemed to be elongated limbs and sharp claw-like hands. Ben felt his heart hammering in his chest. "That's not a bear," he whispered back, his voice barely a breath. The shadow paused, as if sensing their fear, and then began to move again, slowly, deliberately. Another growl, louder this time, seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath them. Rachel's eyes widened with terror. What is it?" she stammered, unable to tear her gaze away from the shadow. The shape shifted, its form rippling as though it were made of smoke and darkness, and then another set of footsteps joined the first, a lighter, quicker pattern that seemed to dance around the tent. Shadows began to multiply, moving faster now, darting between the trees, their forms blurring into an ever-shifting mass. Shapes that resembled twisted, elongated bodies with impossibly long fingers, heads that seemed to twist and turn at unnatural angles. Whispers began to fill the air, indistinct and overlapping, like 100 voices murmuring just beyond comprehension. Ben's breath came in short gasps, panic taking hold. "This isn't real," he muttered to himself, gripping his head. "It's just in our heads. It's just..." The tent suddenly shook, as if struck by something heavy. The lantern flickered, casting frantic, jumping shadows. A deep, bone-chilling howl cut through the whispers, a sound so unnatural and guttural that it seemed to pierce their very souls. The air felt colder, and the ground seemed to tremble beneath them. Rachel screamed, scrambling back against the far side of the tent. "We have to go, now," she cried, her voice filled with pure terror. Her hands were shaking so badly that she could barely pull on her boots. Ben nodded, unable to speak. His eyes were wide, his face pale as he grabbed the lantern and fumbled with the tent zipper. The shadows outside seemed to close in, their forms merging into a solid wall of darkness. The footsteps grew louder, a rapid pounding that filled his ears, drowning out all rational thought. Finally, the zipper came free, and Ben burst out of the tent, pulling Rachel with him. They stumbled into the cold night, their breaths coming in frantic puffs of mist. The forest around them was alive with movement, shadows shifting and darting between the trees. The growls and whispers seemed to echo from every direction, surrounding them. "This way!" Ben shouted, grabbing Rachel's hand and pulling her into the trees. They ran, hearts pounding, branches slapping against their faces, their footsteps loud on the forest floor. Behind them, the shadows seemed to stretch and grow, twisting like living smoke, always just a step behind. They didn't look back. They couldn't. The terror was too much, too overwhelming. They ran blindly through the forest, driven only by the primal instinct to survive, to escape whatever horror was closing in around them. After what felt like an eternity, they broke through a thick cluster of trees and into a small clearing. Rachel gasped for breath, her eyes wide and wild. What was that?" she stammered, clutching Ben's arm as if her life depended on it. Ben shook his head, unable to answer. His mind was racing, His thoughts a jumbled mess of fear and confusion. I don't know. But we need to get out of here. Now. Without another word, they turned and fled, leaving their tent, their gear, and everything else behind in the darkness of Wolfsbane Woods. The forest seemed to watch them go, its shadows rippling like water, disturbed by an unseen force, and somewhere, deep within those cursed woods, the howl of something ancient and evil echoed once more, a sound that carried on the wind like a promise of death. The dirt road leading into Wolfsbane Woods was narrow and overgrown, flanked on both sides by dense towering trees that stretched upward like a canopy of skeletal fingers. The sun was beginning its slow descent in the sky, casting long shadows over the forest floor, but there was still enough daylight left to navigate the twisting path. The Spectral Seekers' paranormal investigations van bumped and jolted as it made its way deeper into the woods, its headlights occasionally flickering from the uneven terrain. Inside, the team sat in a tense silence, each of them lost in thought, their eyes scanning the encroaching forest. Alex Mercer, behind the wheel, squinted ahead, his expression focused. "All right, according to the GPS we should be close," he said. "Keep your eyes open. We're looking for the stone circle." Nina, sitting in the passenger seat, nodded and glanced at the map in her lap. "There should be a clearing just up ahead," she replied, tracing a path with her finger. "That's where the most recent sightings were reported." As the van rounded a bend, they saw it, a small clearing off to the right. Alex pulled the van to a stop, and the team climbed out, stretching their legs and taking in the surroundings. The air was cool, the scent of earth and pine heavy in the air. The trees whispered as the wind rustled through their leaves. Daniel noticed something just beyond the clearing. "Hey, look over there," he called out, pointing to a small, abandoned tent that stood among the trees, its fabric fluttering gently in the breeze. Mia frowned, adjusting her camera strap over her shoulder. "Looks like someone left in a hurry," she said, her tone cautious. "Wonder who it belonged to." "Probably some campers who got spooked," Sam suggested with a shrug, his camera already rolling as he zoomed in on the tent. "Can't say I blame them. This place has a way of getting under your skin." Alex waved them onward. "We'll check it out later if we need to. First, we find the stone circle and set up base. Daylight's fading fast, and I want us ready before it gets dark." The group moved deeper into the woods, their footsteps crunching on fallen leaves and twigs. After a few minutes of walking, they reached the stone circle. The ancient stones jutted out of the ground like jagged teeth, their surfaces covered in strange, indecipherable symbols. Moss and lichen clung to the rock faces, giving them a sickly, greenish hue. "This is it," Alex said, glancing around. "The stone circle. Everyone, let's start setting up." Nina quickly unpacked her equipment, laying out the thermal cameras, motion sensors, and EVP recorders. Daniel began marking the perimeter with chalk, setting up small cameras on tripods to cover all angles of the clearing. Mia walked around, capturing B-roll footage of the eerie surroundings, while Sam set up a central camera on the largest stone, its lens trained on the center of the circle. They worked in silence for a while, each focused on their tasks. As they finished setting up, Alex gathered the team near their temporary base, a small tent they'd set up just outside the stone circle. "All right, let's go over what we know," Alex began, leaning against one of the larger stones. "Why do we think these sightings are happening here, at this specific spot?" Daniel, ever the historian, cleared his throat and stepped forward, holding a stack of notes. "I did some digging into the local legends," he said, flipping through his papers. "This place, Wolfsbane Woods, has a long and dark history. The sightings go back centuries, but the stories are always similar. Strange noises, ghostly apparitions, monstrous shapes in the dark. He paused, looking around at the old stones before continuing. But there's one legend that stands out. The legend of the cursed werewolf. Maya raised an eyebrow. A werewolf? Like an actual werewolf? Daniel nodded. Yes. According to the old stories, there was once a powerful werewolf clan that roamed these woods, cursed with an insatiable hunger and a savage, uncontrollable rage. They were said to be descended from a single, original werewolf, cursed by an ancient force. But as time went on, the bloodline grew thin, and the last of their kind was hunted down by a powerful witch, a woman named Isolde Blackthorn. Nina, adjusting a thermal camera, glanced up. I've read about her, she said. She was known for her mastery of dark magic, right? Exactly, Daniel continued. The story goes that Isolde used a forbidden ritual to bind the last werewolf of that bloodline in these woods, trapping it within this very stone circle. She created a prison from dark magic to contain the beast, using the stones as a barrier that no mortal could cross. Sam, filming the discussion, looked intrigued. So, the stones are like, what, magical chains? More or less, Daniel agreed. The werewolf's physical form was bound, but its spirit, its essence, or whatever you want to call it, is said to have been trapped within the woods. It's been said that the werewolf's ghost roams these woods, looking for a way to break free from the prison and take physical form once again. Alex folded his arms, looking thoughtful. And the recent sightings, the shadows, the sounds, you think that's the spirit? Daniel nodded. Possibly. It's said that the beast grows restless, that it feeds on fear and darkness. And there's one more thing. According to legend, the prison can only be broken by someone of its own blood, a descendant of the cursed werewolf clan. Mia shivered slightly, despite the daylight. So, you're saying a long-lost ancestor might come here and accidentally release the beast? Exactly, Daniel replied. And until then, it's trapped, but its power is still strong enough to affect those who come too close, to create illusions, projections, to draw people into the woods, hoping they'll disturb the prison and let it loose. The team fell silent for a moment, the weight of the legend settling over them like a dark cloud. The shadows of the trees seemed to lengthen, stretching towards the stone circle, as if reaching for the ancient stones. All right, Alex said finally, breaking the tension. We've got our cameras, our sensors, and our equipment set up. If anything is out here, we'll capture it. And if there's any truth to these legends, well, we'll be the ones to find out. Nina checked her devices again, making sure everything was in working order. We should have enough power to run through the night, she said. And we've got backup batteries if we need them. Sam grinned, his camera still rolling. Hope we get something good, he said, half joking, half nervous. I don't know about you guys, but I wouldn't mind catching a werewolf on film. The team chuckled, but there was an underlying tension in their laughter. They all felt it, the sense that something was watching them, just beyond the edge of the clearing. Something old, something dark, something hungry. As the last light of day began to fade, the spectral seekers prepared for the long night ahead, unaware of just how close they were to awakening an ancient evil that had lain dormant for centuries, waiting for this very moment to unleash its fury once more. Mia stood at the edge of the stone circle, her fingers gently tracing the rough, moss-covered surface of one of the ancient stones. Her eyes were fixed on the runes, etched into the weathered rock, their meanings obscured by centuries of erosion and decay. The forest around her was growing dimmer as dusk settled in, but she seemed oddly focused, almost entranced by the stones. Daniel, noticing her lingering at the edge of the circle, walked over, his footsteps crunching softly on the forest floor. "Hey, Mia, you've been staring at those stones for a while," he said, his voice light but curious. "Find anything interesting?" Mia blinked, as if snapping out of a trance. "No, nothing really," she replied slowly. "Just thinking." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "About what?" Mia shrugged, her fingers still grazing the stone. "Just about the curse," she murmured, her tone distant, "and what it must have been like. To be trapped here, alone." Daniel chuckled, trying to lighten the mood. Well, if the legend is true, that werewolf wasn't exactly alone, more like locked up tight, so it wouldn't tear through the countryside. Mia's smile widened, her eyes flicking up to the sky. The moon was rising, pale and full, casting a soft glow over the clearing. For a moment, a strange expression crossed her face, a flicker of something like amusement or satisfaction. "Yes, locked up tight," she whispered, almost to herself. Before Daniel could press her further, Sam's voice cut through the air. "Hey, Mia! Daniel, any luck over there?" He was setting up a thermal camera on the far side of the circle, adjusting the lens to catch every possible angle. Mia turned back to Daniel, her smile still lingering. "Let's go join them," she suggested, her tone almost too cheerful. She moved away from the stones with a fluid grace, her eyes darting briefly back to them, a glint of that same strange light in her gaze. Daniel noticed, but shrugged it off. "Yeah, let's see what the others have found," he agreed, walking beside her. "You know, these stones give me the creeps. They say they were used in rituals. Dark ones." Mia nodded, still smiling faintly. "Oh? You sound like you know a bit about that kind of thing, Daniel." He laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I guess you could say it runs in the family." "My mum, she was into witchcraft, or at least she thought she was. Kept a lot of old books, herbs, crystals. Believed in energies and all that." Mia's smile grew a little wider, her eyes never leaving Daniel's face. "Interesting," she murmured. "Maybe she would have liked these stones." Daniel shrugged again, feeling a little uneasy under Mia's gaze. "Maybe. Or maybe she would have run the other way. Even she had her limits, you know." Mia nodded slowly, her eyes drifting back to the stones. "And what about you, Daniel? Do you have any limits?" Before he could answer, Alex and Nina arrived, both looking slightly frustrated. "Nothing on the sensors so far," Alex reported, glancing around the clearing. "No thermal signatures, no EVP readings. It's like this place is dead." Nina sighed, adjusting her glasses. "I thought I heard something earlier, but it was probably just an animal. No concrete evidence yet." Sam joined them, lugging a heavy camera over his shoulder. "Well, it's still early," he said optimistically. "Plenty of time for something spooky to happen." Mia's eyes sparkled in the dim light. "We'll just have to keep looking," she suggested. "Maybe we should split up, cover more ground." Alex nodded. "Good idea. We'll pair off. Mia, you stick with Daniel. You two seem to have some good theories about this place. Nina and I will take the south side. Sam, you take the north with the thermal camera." The group agreed, and soon they were splitting off into pairs, each moving in different directions. Mia stayed close to Daniel, her smile never fading. As they moved deeper into the woods, she kept glancing back at the stone circle, her expression unreadable. Meanwhile, on the south side of the woods, Alex and Nina moved slowly, their eyes scanning the trees for any signs of movement. The forest was growing darker by the minute, the shadows lengthening and twisting into strange shapes. "Did you hear that?" Nina whispered suddenly, her hand tightening on her flashlight. Alex paused, listening. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the wind rustling through the leaves, then a faint, distant noise, like footsteps, heavy and slow. Probably just an animal, Alex muttered, though his voice was tense. Let's keep moving. But as they continued, the sound seemed to follow them, growing louder, closer. Nina turned suddenly, her flashlight beam catching a glimpse of something moving just at the edge of her vision, a dark shape, darting between the trees. Did you see that? She hissed, her heart racing. Alex turned, scanning the darkness. See what? Nina shook her head. I don't know. Maybe it was just a trick of the light. On the north side, Sam was setting up his camera, trying to focus the lens on a spot where he thought he'd seen movement. He adjusted the thermal display, frowning at the static that crackled across the screen. Come on, give me something, he muttered to himself. Suddenly, he heard a low, guttural sound, a growl that seemed to come from deep within the woods. He froze, his breath catching in his throat. Slowly he turned, the camera's night vision catching a flicker of movement in the underbrush. Hello? He called out, his voice trembling slightly. Is someone there? No answer, just the sound of leaves crunching, twigs snapping, and that low growl growing louder. Back with Mia and Daniel, the two of them were walking near the edge of the stone circle. Daniel was talking, trying to keep his nerves in check. You know, I'm not really sure about all this werewolf stuff, he admitted, but there's definitely something strange about these woods. Mia nodded, still with that faint smile. Oh, there's something here all right, she whispered, her voice almost lost in the wind. Something very old and very angry. Daniel glanced at her, noticing the odd look in her eyes. Mia, are you okay? He asked, concern creeping into his voice. She turned to him, her smile growing wider. I'm just excited, she said softly. Excited to see what happens next. Daniel shivered, feeling a chill run down his spine. The moon had risen fully now, casting an eerie light over the clearing. The stones seemed to pulse with a faint, almost imperceptible glow. He looked back at Mia, and for a moment he thought he saw something in her eyes, something dark, something knowing. Before he could say anything, the forest around them seemed to come alive with movement. Shadows flitted between the trees, accompanied by strange whispering sounds and distant growls. The night was filled with a sense of unease, of something lurking just out of sight. We should find the others, Daniel said quickly, glancing around nervously. Stick together. Mia nodded, her smile never wavering. Yes, she agreed. Let's see what the night brings. And as they moved deeper into the woods, the shadows seemed to follow them, creeping closer, as if drawn by some unseen force, waiting for the moment when darkness would finally reclaim the cursed grounds of Wolfsbane Woods. Mia led Daniel back through the darkening woods, her steps purposeful, almost too eager. The moon hung high in the sky now, casting an eerie, silvery light over the clearing as they approached the ancient stone circle once more. The trees seemed to close in around them, their branches intertwining overhead like skeletal fingers. The shadows grew deeper, darker, moving with an unnatural life. There's no one here yet, Mia said softly, her voice carrying an edge of anticipation. She glanced around the empty clearing, her eyes darting to the stones. Daniel felt a shiver run down his spine, a creeping sense of unease settling in his gut. He looked around, and for a moment he thought he saw shapes moving in the darkness behind Mia. Shadows that twisted and writhed as if alive, curling and uncurling, like smoke caught in an unseen wind. His breath caught in his throat. Mia, what's happening? He asked, his voice barely more than a whisper, There was a coldness in the air, a weight pressing down on him, as if the very forest held its breath. Mia turned to face him, and there was something different in her eyes now. A darkness, a hunger that hadn't been there before. "It's time, Daniel," she whispered, her voice low and strangely melodic. "Time for him to be free. For years, we have waited for the right moment, the right alignment of the moon and the bloodline, a descendant of the witch who imprisoned him, and a descendant of the Lycan curse." Daniel felt his blood run cold. He took a step back, shaking his head. "What are you talking about, Mia? What do you mean, we?" His eyes flicked to the stones, which seemed to pulse with faint, dull light, a glow that grew stronger with each passing second. Mia's smile widened, her eyes narrowing. "You don't understand, do you?" she said, almost laughing. "I am one of them, one of the last descendants of those who were cursed to roam these woods as wolves under the blood moon. I have been waiting for this. For you, a descendant of the witch, the blood that binds the curse." Daniel's heart raced, his mind spinning. "Mia, no. This is insane, you're not making any sense." But it was too late. The stones around them began to glow with an ancient, unholy light, a deep, throbbing pulse that seemed to resonate from the very earth. Mia's eyes turned black, completely black, the whites disappearing into an abyssal void. She tilted her head back, a strange, rapturous smile stretching across her face. "Yes, the time has come," she hissed, her voice now a strange, guttural tone. "For centuries, our ancestor has waited. For the prison to weaken, for the blood to spill. Now the moon is full, the lineage is here, and he will rise again." Before Daniel could react, Mia moved with inhuman speed, her hands slashing across his back with a strength that defied her small frame. Pain exploded through Daniel's body, a burning, searing agony as he stumbled forward, gasping. He tried to scream, but the sound was choked in his throat. His blood flowed freely, dark and thick, spilling onto the stones at his feet. Mia's voice rose in a fevered chant. Yes, be free, great ancestor. Be free from your prison of stone and shadow. The blood calls to you, the blood of the witch who bound you. Take it and rise." Daniel collapsed to his knees, clutching at his back, his vision blurring with pain and terror. He looked up, seeing the stones glowing brighter now, pulsing with a light that seemed to draw in the very darkness around them. Shadows swirled like a living mist, converging on the circle, pulled inward by some unseen force. Mia continued to chant, her voice rising higher and higher, her eyes wide and filled with a manic ecstasy. The ground beneath the stones began to tremble, and the air grew thick with a sense of malevolence, an ancient hatred that had waited for centuries to be unleashed. The stones pulsed faster, brighter, their light becoming almost blinding. And then, in the center of the circle, a figure began to materialize, slowly at first, a faded, shadowy outline, like smoke forming into a shape. It was hunched, twisted, its limbs long and sinewy, its form shifting and unstable as if it were caught between worlds. Daniel gasped, his blood pooling around him, his body trembling with fear and pain. He watched in horror as the figure in the center of the circle grew more defined, its shadowy edges hardening into solid form. The air around it seemed to ripple, distorting with heat and darkness. The shape took on the form of a massive, hulking creature, a werewolf, but unlike any that could be imagined. Its body was covered in matted, coarse fur, black as night, its muscles rippling beneath its skin. Its face was elongated into a snarling snout, its jaws filled with rows of razor-sharp teeth that dripped with a dark, oily saliva. Its eyes were a hellish, fiery red, burning with a fury that had been contained for centuries. The creature's claws, long and jagged, flexed as if testing their freedom, and a low, guttural growl rumbled from its throat, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath them. It was massive, towering over the stones, its form seeming to absorb the light around it, casting long, terrifying shadows across the clearing. It sniffed the air, its nostrils flaring, and its eyes fell upon Daniel, who lay bleeding at the edge of the circle. A growl rumbled deep in its chest, and it bared its teeth, a sound that was half snarl, half roar. It was a sound filled with anger, with a rage that had been building for centuries, an unquenchable thirst for vengeance. Mia laughed, her voice shrill and filled with glee. Yes, rise, great ancestor. Feel the night air, taste the fear, reclaim your dominion. Your time of imprisonment is over. The werewolf threw back its head and howled, a bone-chilling, otherworldly sound that echoed through the forest, sending flocks of birds screeching into the sky. The very trees seemed to shiver with the force of it, their leaves rustling violently. The creature turned its gaze to Mia, its red eyes narrowing, a look of recognition passing over its snarling face. Mia, still smiling, bowed her head. I have freed you, Great One, she whispered reverently. Do as you will. But the beast did not answer. It seemed to sniff the air again, sensing, feeling its surroundings, its mind slowly awakening from centuries of confinement. It was filled with fury, with a wild, unthinking rage. A beast unleashed after centuries, no longer bound by chains of stone or magic. Daniel, bleeding and weak, watched in horror as the creature's form solidified further, its muscles tensing, its claws digging into the earth. He tried to crawl backward, but his strength was failing him. His eyes locked onto the werewolf's, and in that moment he saw nothing but hatred, pure and primal. The werewolf took a step forward, the ground trembling beneath its weight, its growl deepening, louder and louder, until it seemed the entire forest vibrated with its fury. It was free, and it was hungry. Hungry for revenge, for flesh, for blood. After centuries of imprisonment, it would not be denied. And as its savage eyes fell once more upon the stone circle and the cursed ground it had been bound to for so long, its lips pulled back into a snarl, and it leapt forward with a speed and power that defied its massive size, its roar tearing through the night, heralding the terror that was about to be unleashed upon the world once more. The forest was shrouded in darkness as Alex, Nina and Sam rushed back toward the stone circle, their flashlights flickering in the gloom. They had heard the screams, the raw, agonized cry that had ripped through the woods, sending shivers down their spines. Now their hearts pounded with fear and confusion as they sprinted through the trees, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. When they broke through the clearing, they saw him, Daniel, crumpled on the ground near the stones, his body slick with blood. His face was pale, his eyes wide with terror and pain. He clutched at his side, blood seeping through his fingers, pooling in around him in a dark, spreading stain. Daniel, Nina cried out, rushing to his side, dropping to her knees beside him. Oh my God. Daniel, what happened? Daniel coughed, his breath laboured and wet. He tried to speak, his voice a strained whisper. Mia. It was Mia. She did this, he gasped, each word a struggle. She's one of them. Part of the curse. She freed it. Alex knelt beside him, his face pale and his jaw clenched. Freed what, Daniel? What are you talking about? The werewolf, Daniel whispered, his eyes filled with fear. She brought it back. Said it was their great ancestor. I tried to stop her, but she attacked me. Here. Sam glanced around nervously, his flashlight, darting over the trees and the stones, which still pulsed faintly with that strange, otherworldly glow. "Where is she now?" he asked, his voice shaking. Before Daniel could answer, a voice cut through the darkness, soft and mocking. "Nobody likes a snitch." They all turned, their flashlights swinging toward the source of the voice. There, standing just at the edge of the clearing, half hidden in the shadows, was Mia. Her eyes were black as the night, two empty voids that seemed to swallow the light. She smiled, a cold, knowing smile. "Our great ancestor is ready," she whispered, her voice dripping with malevolent glee. "Ready for a game of hide and seek. I suggest you all hide as fast as you can." Before they could react, Mia vanished into the darkness, as if swallowed by the shadows themselves. A bone-chilling howl erupted from the depths of the woods, a sound so deep and primal it seemed to shake the very ground beneath them. It was a howl of hunger, of fury, of a beast newly freed from centuries of imprisonment. Nina gasped, panic flashing in her eyes. "The werewolf! It's coming for us," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. "We need to hide. Now." Alex hesitated, looking down at Daniel, who was bleeding heavily, barely able to move. "We can't just leave him here," he shouted. "He needs help." Daniel's eyes were wide, desperate. "Please, help me. Don't leave me." But the terror had already set in. Sam grabbed Nina's arm, pulling her back. "We have to go now," he shouted, his voice cracking with fear. "If we don't hide, we're dead." Nina looked torn, her eyes darting between Daniel and the darkness encroaching on them. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Daniel," she whispered, her voice choked with guilt. And then they were gone, their footsteps pounding against the forest floor as they fled into the night, their flashlight beams bouncing wildly through the trees. Daniel watched them go, his heart sinking, his body trembling with fear and pain. He tried to move, tried to crawl away from the stone circle, but his strength was fading fast. Every movement sent waves of agony through his body, his blood leaving a dark trail behind him. "Please, don't leave me," he whispered, his voice barely more than a breath. From the darkness, a shape began to emerge, a massive, hulking form that seemed to grow larger with every step. The werewolf stepped into the moonlight, its eyes blazing with a fierce, blood-red glow. Its snout was curled back in a snarl, exposing rows of jagged, glistening teeth. The creature's body was covered in matted fur, its muscles rippling beneath its skin as it moved with a predatory grace. Daniel's breath hitched in his throat, his heart racing with a terror he had never known. He tried to crawl faster, but his limbs were weak, trembling. The werewolf's growl rumbled through the air, low and menacing, as it stalked closer, its nostrils flaring as it sniffed the scent of his blood. Daniel's eyes filled with tears, his voice a hoarse, desperate whisper. "No, please, please." But the werewolf did not stop. It moved slowly, deliberately, savoring the fear that radiated from its prey. Its massive claws dug into the earth with each step, its breath coming in hot, heavy pants that filled the air with mist. Daniel tried to drag himself further, but his body was failing, his strength ebbing away. The werewolf's eyes never left him, its gaze locked onto his with a terrifying intensity. It crouched low, muscles coiling like springs ready to strike. "Please, no." Daniel whimpered, his voice breaking. With a roar that seemed to split the night, the werewolf lunged, its claws slashing through the air. Daniel screamed, a sound of pure agony, as the creature's claws tore into his flesh. Blood sprayed across the stones, and the werewolf's snarl deepened, a guttural, savage sound of triumph. It bit down, tearing into Daniel with a ferocity born of centuries of imprisonment and hunger. His screams filled the clearing, echoing through the woods, and then they were cut short, leaving only the wet, sickening sounds of the werewolf's feast. The stones pulsed brighter for a moment, as if drinking in the blood that now soaked the earth around them, then began to dim, their glow fading slowly back into the darkness. The forest grew silent once more, save for the heavy, satisfied breathing of the werewolf, its mouth stained with blood. And then, as if sensing that the hunt had only just begun, the werewolf raised its head to the sky and howled, a sound that carried far into the night, a call to the shadows, to the darkness, to the terror that awaited those who dared to linger in the cursed woods of Wolfsbane. The forest was alive with shadows and whispers, the moon casting long, twisting beams of silver light that danced between the trees. A heavy mist had begun to roll in from the depths of Wolfsbane woods, curling through the branches and wrapping around the trunks like ghostly tendrils. The air was thick with dread, every sound amplified by the stillness of the night. Alex, Nina and Sam ran blindly through the darkness, their breaths coming in ragged gasps, hearts pounding with terror. They could hear the howls behind them, deep, guttural, and hungry. The werewolf was on the hunt, and they were the prey. "We need to split up," Alex shouted, his voice barely audible over the sound of their frantic footsteps. "It's our only chance." "No," Nina screamed back, panic in her eyes. "We should stay together. We have to." A deafening roar tore through the air, and suddenly the forest exploded with movement. The werewolf crashed through the underbrush, its massive form leaping from the shadows with terrifying speed. It was a blur of fur and claws, its red eyes blazing in the moonlight. Sam, lagging behind, felt a massive force slam into him, knocking him to the ground. He screamed as he rolled over, coming face to face with the beast. Its snout was inches from his face, saliva dripping from its fangs. Its breath was hot and foul, reeking of blood and decay. "No, no, get away!" Sam shrieked, kicking desperately at the creature. But it was no use. The werewolf's claws slashed through the air, raking across his chest with a sickening rip. Blood sprayed into the night, and Sam's scream was cut short as the werewolf bit down, its jaws snapping around his throat. Alex and Nina glanced back, just in time to see Sam's body go limp in the creature's jaws, his lifeless eyes staring up at the moon. The werewolf tossed him aside like a rag doll, eyes blazing with feral hunger. "Run!" Alex shouted, grabbing Nina's arm and pulling her forward. "Don't look back!" They sprinted deeper into the woods, weaving between trees, their breaths ragged and panicked. The werewolf's roar followed them, echoing through the forest like a death knell. Nina could hear its heavy footsteps, pounding against the ground, closing the distance. "Over here!" Alex pulled her sharply to the right, and they dove behind a thick cluster of bushes. They crouched low, trying to control their breathing, their hearts racing so loudly it felt as though they would burst from their chests. For a moment, there was silence. Then they heard it, the slow, deliberate crunch of leaves and twigs under heavy footsteps. The werewolf was moving slowly now, its growl low and rumbling, a sound that vibrated through the air. It was searching, sniffing the air, hunting. Nina's hand gripped Alex's arm so tightly, her knuckles turned white. What do we do?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Alex didn't answer. He was staring straight ahead, his eyes wide with fear. "Stay quiet," he mouthed, barely moving his lips. "Don't move. Don't breathe." The werewolf prowled closer, its nostrils flaring, its claws dragging through the underbrush. Its massive head turned slowly, sniffing, its ears twitching as it listened for any sign of movement. Suddenly, a twig snapped under Alex's foot, and the werewolf's head snapped in their direction, its eyes locking onto them with a fierce, predatory intensity. "Run!" Alex yelled, pushing Nina forward. She took off, her legs burning with the effort, her lungs screaming for air. Alex stayed behind for just a moment, trying to draw the creature's attention away. He picked up a rock and hurled it into the darkness, hoping to create a distraction. The werewolf's eyes darted to the sound of the rock, but only for a split second. It turned back, snarling, and launched itself forward. Alex barely had time to move before the beast was upon him. It tackled him to the ground, its claws tearing into his side. He screamed, feeling the hot rush of blood soaking his clothes. "Go, Nina!" he shouted, his voice breaking with pain. "Just go!" Nina hesitated for a moment, tears streaming down her face, but then she turned and ran, knowing she couldn't help him now. She heard Alex's screams echoing behind her, a sound that would haunt her for the rest of her short life. The werewolf's growls grew louder, more frenzied, and then there was silence. Nina knew what it meant. Alex was gone. She kept running, her breath coming in short, desperate gasps, her heart hammering in her chest. She stumbled over roots and rocks, her vision blurring with tears. The forest seemed to close in around her, the trees twisting and shifting like they were alive, trapping her in a maze of shadows. Then she heard it, a soft, steady rustling behind her. She dared to glance back, and there it was, moving through the trees with terrifying speed. The werewolf's eyes glowed like hot coals, its breath steaming in the cool night air. It was playing with her, enjoying the chase. No, please, she whimpered, her legs burning with exhaustion. She turned a corner, hoping to find some way out, some shelter, but there was nothing. Only more trees, more shadows, more darkness. She felt a hot breath on her neck, heard the snap of jaws just inches away. She screamed and stumbled, falling to the ground, her hands scraping against the rough bark of a fallen tree. The werewolf was on her in an instant. Its massive paw slammed down on her back, pinning her to the ground. She felt the claws dig into her flesh, and she cried out in pain. "Please, don't," she begged, her voice breaking. But the werewolf had no mercy left, no humanity. It snarled, lowering its head to her ear, and let out a low, guttural growl. Then, with a swift, brutal movement, it bit down on her shoulder, tearing through flesh and bone. Nina's scream was short, sharp, and then there was only the wet sound of tearing flesh. The werewolf stood over her broken body, its fur stained with blood, its eyes still burning with hunger. It lifted its head to the sky and howled, a long, mournful sound that echoed through the forest, a proclamation of its victory. There was one more. The beast turned, its ears twitching, its nostrils flaring, as it picked up the scent of its final prey. Mia stood, watching from the shadows, her black eyes shining with triumph. She smiled as the werewolf moved towards her, slow and deliberate, its jaws stained with blood. "Are you satisfied, great ancestor?" she whispered, her voice a mixture of reverence and madness. "Have you claimed your prize?" The werewolf paused, its head tilting as if considering her. Then it growled, low and deep, and turned away, disappearing into the night, its shadowy form melting into the darkness of Wolfsbane Woods. The hunt was over. For now. Mia stood alone in the clearing, the moon casting her shadow, long and thin, across the forest floor. The night was still, the air heavy with the lingering scent of blood and fear. The werewolf had vanished into the depths of Wolfsbane Woods, its roars echoing faintly in the distance as it moved deeper into the night, hungry for more. She stepped forward, her black eyes reflecting the cold light of the moon. The stones around her, now silent and dark, seemed to pulse with a fading power. She smiled, a slow, satisfied smile, her lips parting as she began to speak into the darkness, her voice low and filled with a strange, almost hypnotic rhythm. "You wish to know the tale, do you?" she murmured, her voice barely more than a whisper, yet it seemed to carry through the trees, reaching out into the very shadows themselves. "The tale of my great ancestor, the beast who was once feared by all, who was a nightmare given flesh and form." She stepped closer to the stones, her fingers brushing against their rough surfaces. "Long ago, in a time forgotten by most, there was a man, a warrior, fierce and unyielding, a leader of a pack that knew no equal. But he was more than a man. He was a monster, a werewolf born under a blood moon, cursed with an insatiable hunger, with a rage that could never be quenched." Her smile grew wider, her eyes glinting with dark delight. "He spread terror wherever he went, his claws stained with the blood of the innocent, his howl a sound that sent shivers through the bravest of souls. He revelled in the fear, the chaos, the darkness. But there were those who feared his power, who sought to end his reign." She paused, her gaze drifting up toward the moon, her voice dropping lower. "A witch, powerful and wise, known as Isolde Blackthorn, came to these woods. She saw the havoc my ancestor wreaked, the terror he spread, and she decided that his curse must end. She wielded her magic, ancient and dark, and she devised a plan to bind him, to trap him within a prison of stone and shadow." Mia's voice grew softer, almost reverent. She used the stones, these very stones, and with her incantations, with the blood of a wolf and the power of the moon, she created a seal, a prison from which he could not escape. And so he was bound, trapped within this place, hidden from the world, his fury contained, for a time. She laughed softly, a sound that sent a chill through the air. But curses do not die so easily. And his hatred grew, festering in the dark, feeding on the fear of those who dared to come near. He waited. Oh, how he waited for the right moment, the right blood, the right time. Her eyes narrowed, her expressions fierce. And that time is now. The magic of the old ways is gone, faded from this world like mist in the morning light. The witch is long dead, her power forgotten, and there is no one left who knows the words, the rituals, the spells that might bind him once more. She looked out into the darkness, her voice rising with an almost triumphant fervour. Now he is free, free to spread his terror once again, free to fulfill his vengeance, his destiny, to walk the world as he was meant to, unchained and unstoppable, to unleash a darkness that no one can stand against. Maya's voice softened to a whisper, but her words seemed to echo, carried by the wind. And what can the modern world do against such an ancient force, with its machines and its weapons, its science and its reason? Nothing. Nothing at all. For the old ways are gone, the magic has faded, and all that remains is fear. She stepped back into the shadows, her black eyes glinting one last time. So run, if you can, she said, her voice barely audible. Run while there is still light, while there is still hope. But know this, you cannot hide from what is coming. He will find you. He will find you all. And with that, she melted into the darkness, her form swallowed by the night, her presence fading like a ghost into the trees. The forest seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting, as if knowing that something terrible had been set loose upon the world, something that could not be stopped. The moon hung high in the sky, casting its pale light over the cursed woods, over the stones that had held a monster for so long. And in the distance, a howl rose once more, a sound that cut through the silence, a promise of death and destruction. The night was alive with shadows, and the darkness whispered of things that should never have been released, of an ancient evil reborn, a terror that would soon walk the world once more. And somewhere, deep within the shadows, the werewolf moved, its eyes burning with rage, with hunger, with the promise of vengeance yet to come,